Hey there, YouTube. This is my Grumgully EDH slash, not really CEDH list for Grumgully. There aren't a lot of lists online, so I figured I would put mine out there since I don't think a lot of them have been good. So let's start off with the land base, of course. You know, you gotta have lands. We have most of our dual lands. We got Game Trail, Rootbound Crag, Copperline Gorge, Crumpleson Forest, Stompin' Grounds. We have our Pathway, Cinderglades, Moss Valley, and Sheltered Thicket. Obviously, I don't have the Fetch or Duel. And I'm missing a few others, which I plan to get later, but they're not really necessary. This deck doesn't have a lot of problems with color fixing. Obviously, we have our two gold lands here with our Command Tower and our Exotic Orchard. Just good lands. We play a copy of Crystal Vein, because sometimes you're just one mana short of winning the game, so it's helpful. We also run our two artifact lands, and we do this only because we run a copy of Goblin Engineer, which we'll get to later. Obviously, then it's just a bunch of basics, so put those out to the side. Alrighty. Now time for what I call R&R, our ramp and rituals. So let's start off with the ramp. We play four of our dorks. I'm missing Boreal Druid. I'll get it eventually. These obviously is tap for green, and the Arbor Elf can sometimes tap for a red if we have down one of our duels with basic land types. We got a copy of Wild Growth. I actually think these are better than the dorks, because it's a lot harder to remove. Play a copy of Springleaf Drum. This is what I would cut for Boreal Druid, but it's in here for now. Obviously, we have our Soul Ring. And our final one-mana dork is Orcish Lumberjack. Probably one of the best cards in the entire deck, in my opinion. I think it's underrated. Being able to sacrifice a forest for 3 red mana. This is mainly for either the turn before you go off, where you need a lot of setup, or the turn that you do go off. You need bursts of mana, so this is really helpful. Speaking of bursts of mana, we have our Devoted Druid that we can tap a bunch. We want to kill it when we play it. We'll tap it once for the first turn or two, but then when we go all out, we'll tap it as many times as we can, sacrifice it. The best part about that is Grumgully will give it a +1/+1 counter, so it can tap an additional time. We play Incubation Druid. Just because it's 2 mana taps for 3 if we have Grumgully out. We have our Wall of Roots. Grumgully gives it an additional +1/+1 counter, so it can tap for, or not tap for green. It can produce a green in an additional time. What's good about this is you can activate this once per turn, so you can activate it on your opponent's turn. Skur Tribelder. It's okay. It's decent. Probably should cut it. I don't have any of the Moxen or the really fast ramp, so I have cards like this. But you can still sacrifice them for some of the effects, aside from the ramp, so it's pretty good. We have 2 of our rocks. I need to get the talisman for the deck because of the Goblin Engineer, which we'll get to later. And then finally, we have a weirder one. A lot of people think it's bad. I personally disagree. We have Domri, Anarch of Bolas. Best part about this is the counter. Creatures, spells you cast can't be countered, which is nice. But you also have this bottom part. Rarely use it, but in my group, we have someone who plays a lot of Hate Bears. So this is helpful for removing the ones that shut off my strategy, because I can just make my creatures, which are usually larger than his, make them fight him. And it's weird removal, essentially. And now to the rituals. We play a Rite of Flame, Desperate Ritual, Seething Song, Simian Spirit Guide, and I count Tinderwall as a ritual, since you play it for the green, but then you sack it for 2 red, so it's a little better than a ritual, because you can definitely let it sit there, kind of store up for when you need a bigger burst. The whole deck is like that. You want to wait, okay, I win. That's generally how the strategy works. So we have these rituals. Obviously, I wouldn't play all these rituals if I had the expensive mana rocks. All right. Now to A bit of the starting strategy here. We have the sacrifice outlets. This is a pod deck. You need a lot of sack. So here we have Spawning Pit, probably one of the worst sacrifice outlets because it's only a sacrifice outlet. It doesn't do anything else. We also have Bogarden Dragonheart. We use this one because it's a creature and it can be tutored. We have Skirk Prospector, which is only for goblins, but we have a couple incidental goblins in here just because they can tutor each other up, and Goblin Engineer. And we also have a Persist creature that's a goblin, so we can create infinite red mana when we have Grumgully on the field, and the Skirk Prospector. We have an Ashnod's Altar. It's alright. But then we have 3 sacrifice outlets that, along with this Persist creature, are I win the game. We have Goblin Bombardment, Altar of Dementia, and Blasting Station. Each one of these, you can either infinite mill, infinite damage, or infinite damage. And generally you win the game. So those are the best ones. But the other ones are just there as enablers. So because we have to run sacrifice outlets like that just sacrifice, they don't do anything else, I also run Impact Tremors, which can turn Spawning Pit into something like Goblin Bombardment. Because you'll get infinite enters the battlefield effects when you sacrifice a Persist creature and have Grumgully on the field. I'll show you the combo later. We also play Hissing Iguana for the same reason we play the Dragonheart, because it's a creature. It's easier to tutor up. We also play a Reckless Fireweaver, and the reason we play a copy of Reckless Fireweaver is because we have a Persist creature that is an artifact, and it's actually part of a Hulk pile I will show you at the end when we go over combos. So let's get these out of the way. Alrighty, so next we have our Persist creatures. We play a Fury Stoke Giant, an Aeroofs, Scuzzback Marauders, and a Lesser Masticore. We do not play the Thunderblust, nor the big one. It's like 5 green. Woodfall Primus, that's the one. The reason we do that is because the mana cost is just so high. As you can see, these have horrendous mana costs. 5 mana, 5 mana, 5 mana. Disgusting. This one's the best one in the deck, by far. This one is the second best because we have some ways to tutor it up, and it's a goblin, so it obviously works with Skirkback Prospector. Or not Skirk, yeah, Skirk Prospector. This is Scuzzback. My bad. Hopefully with Modern Horizons 2 we'll get some additional Persist creatures, but we only got this one in Modern Horizons 1. We can be hopeful. We don't need all of them because we have a lot of tutors. If I were able to get better tutors, I'd probably cut these 2, or at least this one, mainly because of the 2 red pips. Alright, and for Persist, we're going to have some more Persist enablers aside from Grumgully. We have Rhythm of the Wild for the Riot effect, and what we always want to choose is the enters with an additional +1/+1 counter. And for Melira, this shuts off the -1/-1 counter effect when a Persist creature comes back, so it comes back with no counters on it. Melira is also part of a Hulk pile along with this Lesser Masticore, so I will show you that later during combos. Alright, so how are we going to get all this? We're going to tutor for it. So let's go over the tutors. We've got probably one of the worst ones, which is this Goblin Matron. These aren't the best tutors I could possibly have, but these are the tutors I can afford. This deck is close to maybe $200, so it's obviously not all the way there in terms of competitiveness, but it does very well. We have a Goblin Engineer. When it enters the battlefield, we basically get Entomb for an artifact. Generally, when you do that, you want to go and get the Blasting Station that you can then recur, but you have to sacrifice an artifact to do that, which is why we run the artifact lands, and we have some artifact ramp in the deck. Even though artifact ramp is, or at least the 2-mana artifact ramp is so-so. We have a Shared Summons, just because it can get you 2 creatures, that's pretty nice. We have a Signal the Clans, which is generally a pretty bad card, but since we have 4 Persist creatures, we can always guarantee ourselves a Persist creature. Ideally, we would get the Lesser Masticore, but sometimes we'll hit the 5-drop ones when we roll for that. We have a Summoner's Pact. We have a Natural Order, an Eldritch Evolution, and a Court of Calling. Of all the tutors here, I will definitely say that the Natural Order is the best of them, because if we have a sacrifice outlet and Grumgully on the field, we win the game by casting this. We can sacrifice Grumgully, go get the Protean Hulk, sacrifice the Protean Hulk, and then we have a Hulk pile that needs a sacrifice outlet, and we win the game from there, which I will show you later. All right, getting these off the field. So how are we going to protect all these combos? Because they're pretty fragile and very telegraphed. So if somebody knows what we're doing, we're kind of dead. So we have a Guttural Response. I know, not the best card. We have a Pyroblast, a Red Elemental Blast, and an Autumn's Veil for the instance. I do not have a Veil of Summer, though I would highly recommend putting it in the list. I just don't think it's worth $10. Probably going to get reprinted. We have a Vexing Shusher. Fantastic. This is probably one of the best deterrents, because if we have a mana open, we can just guarantee our spells to be uncounterable. And then we have Destiny Spinner. Making our creatures and enchantments uncounterable is nice. The enchantments really only comes into play when it has to do with either Rhythm of the Wild or Goblin Bombardment, but the creature part is definitely the best part about that. Alrighty, getting these out of the way, we have to stop our opponents occasionally, and this deck is really trying to go hard, go fast, so we don't have a lot of interaction, but we do have a copy of Beast Within, a copy of Chaos Warp. I don't know how I feel about Chaos Warp. An opponent's still getting a permanent, but in general, you just want to use it, right before someone's about to win. We have Shattering Spree. Love this card. I prefer it over by force, mainly because it creates copies, so it can't be countered all at once. And usually, no one's going to counter the copies that are targeting the opponent's artifacts. They're just going to counter the one that targets one of their permanents. So most of them will get through generally. I don't have a Vandal Blast in here just because of price restriction. We have a Nature's Claim, fantastic removal. Hull Breach, because I deal with a lot of Staxy enchantments in my meta, so this is fantastic for hitting Leyline of the Void and then somebody's Mana Rock or something. We have a Kenrith's Transformation, fantastic for creature removal. It's just, oops, it's an elk, and you get draw a card, replaces itself, fantastic. And then this is just part of interaction, I would say. It's more of a stacks piece, but we have a Magus of the Moon. Obviously, it's not as good as Blood Moon, but since this is a creature, I can tutor it up if I really need to. We run enough basic forests that it doesn't really matter if most stuff are mountains. We can generally win with about 2 or 3 forests. As long as we have access to 2 or 3 green mana, we're good. So, it's fine to run that. Alrighty. We have a few draw cards, not very many because we really want to rely on tutors, but we do have a Faithless Looting, Cathartic Reunion, Wheel of Misfortune, Life's Legacy, and an Okame Adversary. The Okame Adversary, fantastic. Rarely do you run into a pod that doesn't have green, so casting this for 2 is fantastic. The Life's Legacy is kind of a leftover from when this was a Corvold deck. I don't know how I feel about it, but if you do have one of your larger persist creatures on the field, getting 5 cards off of this is fantastic, so I really can't complain. As far as these two go, these are just your average rummage and looting cards, so they're alright. You don't really want to flashback Faithless Looting, but if you have to, you can. As for the Wheel of Misfortune, it's really just super budget, pretty bad Wheel of Fortune. Generally not had a lot of luck with this. It benefits everybody no matter what. If they have a great hand, they can just choose 0, and if they have a bad hand, they can wheel. So sometimes it's better for your opponents than it is for you. Don't recommend playing it if you can avoid it. We have a copy of Regrowth. I would like to replace this with an Eternal Witness for the same reasons I've gone over earlier. Being able to tutor up creatures makes this a lot worse since it's a sorcery. And then once it's on the field, we can't, this just goes straight to the graveyard. You can't sacrifice it. You can't do anything else with it. So I'm going to replace that for an Eternal Witness later. As for our game enders, we have our Protean Hulk, and I consider Treasonous Ogre to be a game ender because generally, if you're going for Treasonous Ogre, you're holding your combo in your hand, and once you get the Treasonous Ogre down, you pay all your life, you dump out your combo and you win the game. That's generally what you're going for. With the Protean Hulk, everybody knows Protean Hulk. Pretty sure it was banned at one point. I haven't been playing too long, but I'm glad it's unbanned. Probably shouldn't be, but hey, whatever. All right, now we will get on to the combos. We'll start with the Protean Hulk combo. There's only one line in this entire deck, which is a terrible idea, but I really don't want to focus on going for Protean Hulk combo all the time, and the reason being is that it's just uninteresting sometimes. You know, it leads to very boring lines of play. But let's say we have our Protean Hulk. We got our Protean Hulk out somehow, and we have a spawning pit or some other sacrifice outlet. You sacrifice your Protean Hulk to your spawning pit, and you go and get Melira, which acts as your persist enabler. You go get a Lesser Masticore, which is your persist creature, so that you can sacrifice it. And you go and get your Reckless Fireweaver. So what you do is, this is also a demonstration of the persist combo. You sacrifice your Lesser Masticore to the spawning pit. It'll go into your graveyard. Graveyard is off camera over here, I guess. Persist will trigger in your graveyard. When it comes back, it would normally enter the battlefield and get a -1/-1 counter. Melira says that you can't get -1/-1 counters, so it just comes in without one. Reckless Fireweaver triggers and deals a damage to each opponent. You can then sacrifice the Lesser Masticore to the spawning pit again. And since it had no -1/-1 counters on it, it comes back. And you can do that infinite and, kill the table. So aside from that, we do have a different way of doing the persist combo, so I will get that out real quick. There's a bunch of different ways. There's a lot of redundancy in this deck, but that's not the best demonstration of the persist combo. So we'll get out a different set of cards here. Let's say you have, let's say an Eerie Oofs. Oops, there it goes. Eerie Oofs. All right, this wins you the game as well. This is a winning board state. So what you do is you tap your Blasting Station, dealing 1 damage to an opponent, sacrificing the Eerie Oofs. Eerie Oofs comes back with a -1 counter. Grumgully gives it a +1 counter. They cancel out, so it has no counters on it. Untaps Blasting Station. Rinse and repeat, okay? Comes back, +1/+1 counter, -1/-1 counter, cancel, untap Blasting Station. You do that over and over again until everybody is dead. There aren't really any other ways to win out here, so once the table gets used to this line of play, they can realize which cards need to be stopped. Grumgully has a hard time sticking around, but it doesn't really matter when you have Melira or you have the Rhythm of the Wild, which is essentially a better Grumgully. I wish Riot was actually on Grumgully, because that haste can be really nice, or would be really nice for something like the Goblin Engineer, since it's very telegraphed what you're doing. If you cast this and you entomb your Blasting Station, it's very telegraphed that, hey, next turn I'm going to get out Blasting Station. So it's so-so. But if it would have haste, you could do it right away, but we can't unless we do have the Rhythm of the Wild. So if we do have this out, you can win a little bit faster that way. Aside from that, I haven't really talked about the Treasonous Ogre as much, but essentially what you can do, my favorite way to win out with this card, is to go and tutor up Treasonous Ogre and Hissing Iguanar with something like your shared summons. And what this will let you do is usually you'll get to the point of having a sacrifice outlet and a persist creature because there are so many. But sometimes you are lacking that damage with the Hissing Iguanar. So what you can do is you can shared summon out your Treasonous Ogre, and what'll either happen is either you'll have 7 mana and you can cast both, or you cast the Treasonous Ogre kind of trying to bait out removal before you cast your Hissing Iguanar, though if they don't counter this, just pay your 9 life and get your Hissing Iguanar out. As soon as this enters the battlefield, you win the game from there, if they don't know when to respond. The weakness of this deck is certainly the time that they can respond when the persist creature is going to the graveyard. When this creature is in the graveyard, it'll trigger persist and allow your opponents a round of priority. So from here, they can blow up your blasting station or one of your other sacrifice outlets. So unfortunately, it is fairly easy to stop. However, if they don't know when to do it, and they see your board state and in response try and blow up this or that, you can do everything at instant speed, and you can do it on the stack before their spell resolves. That'll really only happen at newer tables. But once people know what you're doing, it's a little bit harder to get off. Yep, and that is my video on Grumgully for EDH, or I'd say really, really niche CEDH. I would not bring this to a CEDH table if I were you. It's mid to high power, I would say. And that is all. Probably not going to post any more videos about this. Just thought I'd put it out there. Yep, and goodbye.